Good afternoon. Welcome. We're happy that you're able to join us for this Sunday afternoon 3 p.m. sermon. We are still unable to meet in person all the time. We meet on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. for our worship period, and then the other services are recorded, at least the sermon part. So we're glad that you've been able to log in and join us for this lesson being presented this afternoon. As you think about how we value things in life, many times we value things based on something that is given to us because of what we've done. Uh, we understand that the crown sometimes is used for this purpose. A runner in some kind of a race very often will receive some kind of a symbolic crown, not so much nowadays as in the past during the original Olympic Games, the runners would receive a crown of leaves if it was their fortune to be the winner of the race. And throughout history, crowns have been very important as far as the honor and the respect that they show to the person wearing it, and that person then exhibits to the others who see them. I know that monarchs, especially in those countries where there's a king or a queen, are very protective of the crown that they wear. The Queen of England, I'm told, is entitled to wear the crown of the Queen of England. And it's a crown that's sequestered away somewhere in a museum and is only brought out and worn at very special, very regal occasions. And of course, it's extremely valuable, but it's only used for that symbolic purpose. And it's very valuable. In that crown are where the crown jewels of the kingdom reside. I read a story the other day that detailed how that over the course of however long the crown's been in existence, close to 1,000 years, I guess, the crown has never been stolen or attempted to be stolen except for one time. It was in the 1930s. Some insiders tried to steal the crown and its jewels, and they came pretty close. They were actually able to get to the place where the crown was protected. They broke into the display case. They actually were able to hammer the crown into a smaller space because the gold it's made of is pure and very, very soft. And one of the thieves was able to stuff it in his pants, and another one took the loose jewels and put them in his coat pocket. But unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever, they were captured before they got out of the building. And the crown was restored, put back in its proper place, and the thieves, the almost thieves anyway, spent the rest of their lives in prison. And I remember too that the wearing of a crown is something that we desire sometimes. Long about the second or third grade, my teacher had this purposeful idea to reward good academic behavior in the classroom each week by taking the student that had the highest average on all their subjects and awarding them the right to wear for a day the crown. Uh, this was before the days of Burger King, but it was still a construction paper crown, with decorations on it and some kind of an accolade for work well done. And it was pretty fierce competition among the kids in that class to be the one who got to wear that crown for a Friday or whatever it was, because it sort of symbolized the accomplishment of a goal. And though those were physical crowns, they do kind of relate to what Christians experience. You might recall that in the scriptures, there are several references to a crown that God's children have the access to. Now, we're going to see in a little bit that we don't actually have that crown in our possession yet, but it's a crown that we have in sort of a pre-existing state. It's there to be ours at the appropriate time, but in a sense, it is ours. And as God's children, following His will, succeeding in our efforts to be what He wants us to be and live in the image of Christ, we earn that crown. We earn the right to wear it. And one of the places in the scriptures that we read about the significance of this crown is what Paul tells the Colossian Christians. What John is told to write to the churches in Revelation chapter 3. This is part of the letter that is written to the church at Philadelphia. And the church of Philadelphia is unique in that nothing bad is said about it in this letter. It's not condemned for any practices. Instead, it's praised for its ability to uphold the truth and to put down error and to take advantage of the doors of opportunity that the Lord's opened to it. But the church in Philadelphia is given this admonition here at the end of this letter, which is what the Lord tells John to write to that church. And here's what it says, chapter 3 and verse 11. Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, that no one may take your crown. You know, it sounds like the church in Philadelphia there, the members of it at least, were entitled to this crown. And the crown relates to their good service to the Lord. And the Lord tells them to be careful about it. Hold fast to what they have, that no one may take your crown. Now, I would suggest to you that crowns today are they're very possessive things. People who have one don't want it to be taken away. Queen Elizabeth wouldn't want that crown taken away from her. Even someone in the sports field, perhaps a boxer who's earned the crown of the heavyweight division, wouldn't want that crown or that honor taken away. And neither should Christians. God's people should be like that church in Philadelphia and hold fast to this crown that we have, though it's more in prospect than reality. But he says here, let no one take your crown. What in the world does that mean? Is it possible for us to have that crown taken away from us? Well, let's take a look here. Paul, the apostle, writes in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 8. He says, beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. He indicates here that it is possible for one to be cheated. And we see from the context of that verse that he's talking about our relationship with God and our adherence to what gains us this crown, if you will. And he says, beware, don't be cheated. What can accomplish that? Well, if we listen to the wrong thing, if we listen or are persuaded by the traditions of men, not according to the traditions of Christ, but according to the basic principles of the world being that evil-natured atmosphere in which we live. What he's saying here is we must be careful, lest we be cheated out of obtaining our precious crown. Now, I'm not suggesting that the only reason we serve God is to get a crown of some kind. Yeah, that's there, and it's something we should aspire to. But there's other reasons for serving God. You know, in relationship to God, we serve him because he loves us and we love him in return. And because we love him, we keep his commandments. That's a part of it as well. And we serve God because he guides us and tells us the things we must do in his word that are pleasing to him. And so we do those things that bring glory to him. And that's important too. But this crown and what it represents is something we'd like to look at a little bit more deeply this afternoon. What kind of crown are we talking about? Like we said back in I think it was third grade, when my teacher gave us this paper crown. It was just a cardboard or construction paper crown. And, it wasn't very special, but what it represented sure was. My years of teaching at Milton High, we didn't allow the students to wear hats and caps as a regular part of their wardrobe, but the seniors each year were allowed to design a crown for themselves and wear that senior crown at special events where they could show off their crowns to the other students. And they were made of whatever, paper, cardboard, construction paper, and they were very personalized, and they were special. They were a representation of the goals that the students had reached to make it to that senior level. So we look at what the scripture tells us about the kind of crown that we wear as Christians. There are some important things. One is that this crown is described as being incorruptible. When Paul wrote to the Corinthian Christians in this first letter, 1 Corinthians in chapter 9, he kind of included a reference to how people competed in various sports of the day. And he says here, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Yeah, the crown that sports figures gain by their winning activities is a valuable and highly prized thing, but it's perishable. In other words, it's going to perish along with the earth when this earth is gone. And maybe before. Even the strongest of materials are not designed to last forever. And so it's a perishable crown. Also, it's perishable in the sense that the person might lose it at some time in the future. Someone else may take over that spot of the best and take that crown away. But we, he says, for an imperishable crown. We're competing. We're competing with Satan to overcome him. And we are, who are temperate, that means well moderated, well regulated, and very, very moderate in things that we do and very focused. We're temperate in all things. We will gain that crown. And for us, it's imperishable. It's not going to disappear. It's incorruptible. Another word that's used for that. Back up just a moment here. That incorruptible crown there. And then also another type of a description of it is what Paul writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 8. It's called there a crown of righteousness. Let's take a look at that. Here Paul, in his second letter, very close to the time when he's going to leave this earthly life, Paul knew that the end of his life was coming up. And he says here to Timothy, finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. And not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. So Paul speaks again in sort of prospect about that crown. He says that crown is laid up for him, and it's a crown of righteousness. You see, that crown symbolizes something. In the sports world, the crown may symbolize power and prowess. In the political world, the crown might symbolize a monarchy and authority, kingship, and so on. But for the Christian, this crown symbolizes righteousness. It's there because our life is one which symbolizes God's righteousness. We've lived for him. We've imitated Christ. We've lived in a righteous manner. And he says there that it's what the Lord gives on that day when the Lord returns. Not to Paul alone, but to everyone who, like Paul, loves his appearing. All right, so let's go back to that for just a moment. That crown of righteousness, he says, is laid up for me. It's there. It's in prospect, but it's certainly real. That crown can also be described as a crown of glory. Peter, in 1 Peter 5 and verse 4, he's writing here to the elders, like himself, men who were elders within the church, and how they're like shepherds over the flock of God. And then he tells them, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Oh, a crown of glory. When people wear the crown today, it represents their glory. When the Queen of England wears that crown, it is a symbol, it's an outward show of the great glory and honor and spectacularness of her position. Well, he says here, when the chief shepherd, that's Jesus, when he appears, not only to those elders, but I believe to every Christian who has lived righteously, that crown of glory will be given, and it does not fade away. Earthly glory will fade. A monarch may reign for centuries, well, okay, decades, but eventually their reign will end, and that crown will pass to somebody else. But he says here, this crown of glory will not fade away. And again, that's its incorruptible nature. We also find that it's a crown which is described as, let's back up here just a moment, a crown of glory. And I'm sorry, back up just a moment. We wanted to emphasize there that means it's an incorruptible crown. It's not going to perish as life goes on. Now then, let's ask this question here. We know what kind of a crown we're talking about, but how is it that someone might take this crown from us? I mean, like we mentioned, there was an attempt made to take the crown away from the Queen of England. there was an attempt made to take that crown and give it to somebody else. How can people do that with this spiritual crown to which we are entitled? Well, it's going to be something which involves our righteousness. It's a crown of righteousness, but if that righteousness is tainted in some way, then that could cause us to lose that crown. And one way that that happens is by somebody speaking or teaching perversions or falsehoods that we end up believing. Paul told the Christians there, the elders from the church at Ephesus in Acts chapter 20, he said, also from among yourselves men will rise up speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves. He was talking here about things that would come in the future after he'd gone away. And he warned those elders about it, but look at what it was. From among themselves, men would speak perverse things, perverted things that are not true to the scriptures. And what would they do? Draw the disciples away after themselves. And of course, when that happens, then that would be a loss. Our souls would be in danger to be drawn away after somebody else that is not teaching the truth. So he warned those Ephesian elders in his farewell address to them. Also in Galatians chapter 1, he wrote to the Galatian Christians about how puzzled he was that they were turning away from the gospel. He says in chapter 1, verse 6, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we've said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. So here it's possible to preach a perverted gospel, and we know that in the world of today, many who claim to be religious leaders and teachers of what the Bible teaches do not teach it. They teach a perverted version, maybe saying that you don't have to be baptized, that only faith will save you. Or that there's no need to worship according to what's in the scriptures. We can worship any old way we want to and be right with God. But those are perversions. They're not the truth. Our crown could be taken away from us if that happens. Someone may encourage error, maybe not teaching it themselves, but like John writes in 2 John chapter, there's only one chapter, but verse 9, he says, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house, nor greet him, for he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. We have to be cautious about that today. There may be religious leaders, even among the churches of Christ, who we think of very highly. And we would not think that they would teach anything wrong, but we know that from experience, some have taken a perverted path. Some have gone into error. And we might be tempted to say, well, I'll still sort of have fellowship with this individual, but realize that I don't agree with everything that he says. But, he says here, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, the doctrine of Christ, then don't receive him. If we greet him, he says we share in his evil deeds. That's a pretty serious matter. And we need to know that that could cause our crown to be taken away from us if we do anything to encourage error. And if we ourselves are led away from sound doctrine, that crown can be disappeared. It can be taken away by those who teach that sound doctrine. Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 4 about a time that will come, he says, when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. We must be careful not to allow ourselves to be led away, even by those that we think and hope and should, I guess, have the experience of them doing the right thing. And yet, when they do teach error, we need to be able to recognize it and not be drawn away by our own desires. We also find that it's possible to deceive ourselves. We could lose our crown by failing to attend to our own life and not doing the things that we should. Back in the third grade, if I was lucky enough to get that crown for the week's work, I knew that to keep it and wear it again the next week, I'd have to continue my strong work. And if I let down, if I deceived myself and said, well, I'm the smartest kid in class, I'll get that crown again, I might not get it if I don't do those things that would gain that crown for me. Self-deception is a danger. James chapter 1, verse 22, James says, be doers of the word, hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Yes, he says here, self-deception comes when we play at religion. When we're not industrious in the Lord's work, we must apply the teaching of the Scriptures to our lives so that we benefit from what the Bible tells us to do and we put it into practice. That's what's happening sometimes, and that is that Christians get into the habit of doing less than full attention to religion. We just play at it. We make sure that we meet when we're supposed to and sort of say the right things, but our heart may not be in it. We may not be industrious in doing the Lord's work. And that's what James says, be doers of the word, not hearers only, because that can deceive you. And deceived means we're going to lose that crown that is there waiting for us. And also in Hebrews chapter 2, the writer says, therefore we must give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. Giving earnest heed means paying good close attention to the things we have heard, and not just hearing them, but putting them into practice. And he tells us here what can happen. He says, diligence is needful because it is easy to just drift off and be taken away from God, be taken away from that crown that we've been talking about this afternoon. So we get a pretty good idea here about the crown and what it means. Now, when we conclude all of our thoughts here, let's be sure we come back to what we said at the beginning. We do not have that crown yet. The crown that we read of here in the Scriptures is that thing, that entity which is reserved for us, like in Revelation 3 and verse 10, or 2 and verse 10, when Jesus says, be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Okay, I will give you. That's a future thing. If we're faithful until death, we don't have that crown yet. Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 8, for bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is and of that which is to come. So the crown is involved with the life that now is, the life that we live and work in, and the life that we use to show Christ to others. And he says, this exercise of godliness is profitable for the life that now is and for that which is to come, which will lead us to that eternal crown, that incorruptible crown that will not vanish away. Well, we ought to be sure then that in our efforts to live in this life and to follow God's way and to be walking in the steps and the pattern of Jesus, that we don't let anybody take our crown. Pretty simple. Don't let someone deceive us by their craftiness or by their worldly teachings, take our crown away from us. There's something else to think about, and that is that we gain that crown basically by being obedient to God. And when God's word tells us that we must hear the word and believe that Jesus is the Son of God and be willing to confess that before men and repent of our sins, turn away from sin and turn to God, and be baptized, be buried with Christ in water into his death, just like he was buried in the tomb, and that when he rose from the dead, we also rise from the waters of baptism to walk in a new life. The obedience that we show to that pattern is what Paul spoke of in Romans chapter 6 when he said, God be thanked that you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine that you were taught. That's what we need to do. And then we have our access to that crown. And we then need to be on guard so that no one takes that crown away from us. It's been a pleasure to share these thoughts with you this evening. We are hopeful that the pandemic will abate at some point and we can begin to have regular meetings on our normal schedule as we used to in the past. But we won't do that until it's safe. And so we're monitoring the situation, and the men at the Church of Baghdad will continue to discuss and assess the situation as to when we can resume meeting on our schedule again. But we do ask you to join us for our recorded Bible studies Sunday morning at 10 and our Wednesday evening Bible study at 6 p.m. and for the recorded sermon here for Sunday afternoon. And then if you're able to attend the 11 a.m. on Sunday worship service, we also tape that and we'll record it and put it on our website so that you can see that later. If you have trouble accessing any of this material online, please call me or drop me a line in a letter or something, and I'll make arrangements to record it onto a disc, a CD, or a DVD for you that can be played on the machine that's appropriate for that, even if you don't have the internet. So let us know what we can do to help, and also remember to keep in prayer for all of those that are affected by this virus, this pandemic, and keep alert for opportunities to serve those who have these needs. Thank you for joining us. God bless you and have a good evening.